Not that many people know this about me, but I only started programming like 2.5 years ago. And that started when I enrolled in the computer science major at my university. I initially was gonna go into university studying psychology because throughout high school, I was mainly studying liberal arts, political science, psychology, and I came from basically no STEM background. I didn't write a single line of code until my introduction to Python class at my university in August of 2023. And so since then, I have developed a lot within the field of computer science. I have a pretty solid career trajectory ahead of me. The reason why I bring this up is that I started to learn programming during a time when there was a complete paradigm shift on how exactly people are not only going to write code and push code into production, but how people are going to learn how to code and practice coding. Either out of incompetence, naivety, or curiosity, I started to use a lot of LLM assistants in the process of me learning how to code. I would have a guilt if I just was using LLMs and I didn't know anything of what was going on. I needed to have at least some control over the code I was writing. I would always go back in good faith to understand what I was writing, to learn the syntax so that I could write it on my own. But all of that was really through LLM assistance. In a way, I kind of think to myself where I regret and be like, oh, I wish I just didn't have so much LLM assistance when I was fresh learning to code. And then I remind myself that I am still pretty new to programming relative to many of my peers and just amongst other people in general. And then I also just assess the fact that I just so happened to get into programming when this shift was occurring. So where does that bring me to today? So my main IDE currently is Cursor. So Cursor is a VS Code fork, and what it basically is that it's a IDE that has generative AI assistance baked into it, meaning you have agentic AI systems that can parse through your directory and gain context from that for when it writes you code or when it gives you suggestions, that kind of thing. I've been using Cursor for like almost a year now because back in like April of 2024, there was this like thing where if you signed up as a student, you would get Cursor Pro for free for a year. So I did that and I've been just using Cursor ever since. Whatever I was saying about LLM assistance, like I had this over-reliance of sorts at times, it just got propelled even more. It doesn't mean that like I got lazier and I just like did all my homework with AI. It was more so that whenever I would problem solve, I would solve out problems and I would write schematics intuitively. And I would always view like the writing code part as something that could be outsourced. And once I would outsource it, it would generate me code and then I would look through the code and do like a double check and then go through it. The reason why the title in this video is because I realized that whatever I've been doing with this over-reliance on LLMs and generative AI for when I am in a programming workflow, under pressure and time constraints, like it will completely fold on you. So for context, I participated in a hackathon over the weekend. I had three other teammates. One of them had to drop because of personal reasons. One of my other teammates was helping with the write-ups, and my other teammate was helping with the project design, what we're going to do, and the code and whatnot. During the hackathon, we were planning out and we were making documents of how exactly we want to build out our certain project. I was building and making schematics and docs of what exactly we should do, what is the plan, what is a high-level overview of this, what are the details. And during that entire time, I was using LLM assistants to refine some of my knowledge or some of the parts in the documents. I won't say that I didn't learn anything from it. Like, I genuinely did learn from using those tools in a positive way, but again, like, there was a lot of usage on that. There was this pressure and time constraint that in the amount of hours that we had left, it was like I was using Cursor and spamming it like it was no tomorrow. But before, like, I did use Cursor, I went and I developed a long document detailing the world environment, the actions, the states, the transition functions, the reward functions, constraints, thresholds, all of that. But even with a whole detailed schematic, out of time constraint that we had, I started just using what I built, the document and notes that I had for this RL environment, and I started writing a lot of code that was heavily assisted. I tried to look at some documentation for SB3 and Gymnasium as well alongside, but ultimately, because of this time constraint, I was like, okay, I need to parse through this documentation. What does this mean? What does this mean? And I was like utilizing LLM so much that it came to a point where I kind of threw in a little bit of a mental towel, and I was like, okay, generate this part or this part based on what I have laid out here in this document. While it did, the problem was that LLMs are not perfect, and the kind of logic that they go about for when they write code, it can get needlessly complex. And especially when there was like hyperparameters that we had to instantiate within our code, it just would assign kind of nonsensical hyperparameters that it felt like was, I guess, okay. But regardless, what I got out of the hackathon was that if I want to be good in the domain that I want to be in, I can't continue to work like this because I'm going to be under pressure. I recently landed an internship. I know that in the internship that much of my knowledge gaps are going to be filled in with the help of company resources, and that's cool and all, but regardless, I just don't feel good about the idea that under an environment where I was tested under pressure, I fell back on this deep over-reliance to where I basically was just incapacitated intellectually, and I was not able to have full control over what I was writing. The reason why I mentioned earlier about when I started programming was because a lot of these habits that I had that ended up manifesting in a situation where the over-reliance with AI created a huge amount of technical debt. These were habits that were started from the very beginning of when I started to learn how to program and code. I thought about it a lot, and I've kind of made the decision that I want to learn how to use some kind of text editor that will help me be more deliberate and fast as well with what I write, to have control over what I write. And I think when I have control over what I write, I will be able to then break out of bad habits that come with over-relying on external systems. I'm not going to be like, oh, I'm going to ditch AI and mentally Butlerian jihad LLMs in my workflow. But I need to be more deliberate, slow, focused, and have more control over what I write. I've decided that I want to learn how to use Neovim. And I've been watching some videos on Vim, and there is a website that my friend recommended me about some basic Vim movements and like a Vim tutorial. I don't think Vim is like particularly difficult, but it's definitely something that takes time to get used to. And a lot of people it's hard for them to break out of habits, especially very convenient and comfortable ones. And not only that, some people have a hard time with getting used to something with practice over a period of time. So you combine those both things, and honestly, for the longest of time, switching to Vim, even though its benefits are very much there, was just an unattractive option for me. But I've come to a point now where I've seen what happens for when real environmental stress in the domain that I work in is applied. And I don't handle that situation pretty. And I can attribute it back to bad habits that I've built in the 2.5 years that I've been programming. I haven't outsourced my brain to an LLM where I have completely no intellectual curiosity and all tasks are just automated. But I'm in this weird middle ground where I have a lot of conceptual and technical understandings of certain things, but I've also outsourced a certain kind of labor that is also deeply required for when you have a strong technical knowledge, because you are then able to tweak the things that you might have problems in. So the reason why I want to switch to Neovim is because I want to be more deliberate and I want to break out of bad habits. And honestly, I just don't want to feel guilty anymore for over-relying too much on this external system. I kind of just wanted to get this out of my head because the weekend really changed a kind of perspective, really exposed to myself a lot of the downsides of the habits I built and just how incompatible it actually is in real environments, rather than just like building personal projects and having like some help with like homework or whatever. And I have like this sense of guilt and accountability for this enough to where I'm making a public video about this. But if this is what someone who is doing their due diligence in using LLMs to help themselves by going back to the material and looking at it legitly and the syntax and all that, I don't even want to imagine what it would be like for someone who isn't intellectually curious or is genuinely lazy in the work and domain that they're in, such that they literally outsource everything and all their tasks to this. I can't even imagine how degenerated their knowledge space would be at that point. That's really it. But yeah, just let me know in the comments or just have a discussion with me about this. But yeah, that's really it.